A haunted town hides a dark secret, uncovered only when the Chuck family moves in. What lies beneath? Discover the mystery in this thrilling movie. The film begins with Ashley, who is video chatting with her friend Isabelle. Their casual conversation is interrupted by a sudden knock at Ashley's bedroom door. She quickly gathers her things and heads toward the door, expecting someone to enter, but no one does. Confused, she pauses, and that's when Isabelle reminds her that her parents and brother aren't even home. Then the knock comes again. Ashley, now slightly uneasy, steps out to check. The hallway is empty. As she glances around, a strange statue stands silently in the drawing room, but her eyes skip right past it. She returns to her room, unsettled by the silence. Just as she's about to shut the door, it knocks again, this time louder, more urgent. A chilling sense of fear grips her. Something isn't right. The scene shifts to a house on Ashland's Fall, where Bonnie arrives with Maria and Chuck to check out the property. Standing outside is Isabelle, who quietly observes the house before stepping inside. This is where she'll be living with her brother and sister-in-law. A new beginning awaits, but the house seems to be hiding something beneath its silence. After this, Chapter 1 begins, which is about Chuck. So let's begin. Chuck has moved into the house with his family. However, the roof is leaking, and he has placed buckets underneath the drips. He takes a photo of the scene and sends it to Bonnie. Later, Chuck goes to check Maria's studio, where she is conducting an online session on her laptop. Behind her stands a creepy dummy named Martha, which Maria placed there herself. Afterward, Chuck steps outside the house and meets their neighbor, Larry. After a brief introduction, Larry tells Chuck that the previous owner of the house had committed suicide. They also mentions that the town is known as a ghost town. Later, Chuck is again discussing the roof leakage with Bonnie while reviewing the pictures he took. That's when he notices something strange behind the buckets. In one of the photos, there's a gun lying on the floor. But when he took the picture, there was no gun there. This discovery leaves Chuck stunned. The next morning, Chuck looks out the window and immediately informs Maria, who also checks through the window and then goes to her studio to find that Martha is not there. Isabelle wakes up to their voices. Chuck goes outside and finds Martha standing in the garden. He approaches her, and Larry joins them. Chuck suspects that Isabelle might have brought Martha to the yard for some reason. Larry advises Chuck to focus on Isabelle, mentioning that many people have committed suicide, and Isabelle has been depressed since her mother's accident, making vulnerable individuals susceptible to something. However, Larry doesn't specify for whom. Isabelle arrives, and Larry excuses himself, mentioning the library and welcoming Chuck to the Friends of Gardening. Chuck seems slightly confused by the conversation. After that, Chuck appears in the library, where it feels like someone is watching him. As he searches for books on one shelf and then moves to the other side, he notices a collection of books on the floor, where there was nothing before. When Chuck turns to investigate the books, there's no one around who could have placed them there. Chuck ignores the books and walks away. Then he notices Ashley sitting, who's looking unwell. She tries to distract Chuck from studying and advises him to leave town. Chuck finds this behavior strange and heads to the counter to mention the books and Ashley's odd behavior to the receptionist, who becomes visibly upset. As Chuck prepares to leave the library with the books, his gaze falls on the notice board, where he sees a poster for the Friends of Gardening. After returning home, Chuck starts reading an Ashland Falls book featuring a picture of an auditorium with only one girl in the audience. The doorbell rings, and Chuck answers it, welcoming Olivia, who has come for piano lessons. Chuck seats Olivia at the piano and heads to the kitchen to get her a glass of water. The piano music continues, suggesting Olivia knows how to play, but when Chuck turns around, he finds her standing at the kitchen door, looking frightened. Olivia claims that a woman is playing the piano. Chuck is perplexed and investigates, but there's no one at the piano and it's not playing. He tries to calm Olivia down, but she's too scared and runs away. In the next scene, Chuck attends a Friends of Gardening meeting, where it's revealed that Ashley has committed a suicide. The group is discussing ghostly figures when Chuck interrupts, asking whose story they're discussing. It turns out they're talking about Helen Foster, who has been responsible for a series of suicides in the town over the past 10 years. She took her own life in her 40s at her home. Just then, Larry senses someone's presence in the corner and gets up to investigate. He sees a ghostly woman passing by from the corner of his eye. Shortly after, everyone gets up to leave, and Chuck is the last to exit. As he walks out, he hears a ghostly voice coming from a room. When he investigates, he finds a terrifying woman sitting alone in the auditorium. She turns her head towards Chuck, and the scene fades to black, marking the end of Chuck's chapter. Let's dive into the next chapter of the movie, which focuses on Isabelle. Are you ready to explore the story further? What's happening with Isabelle? Chapter 2 begins with Isabelle's family visiting their new home. As they explore the house, Isabelle goes upstairs to her room and turns on the light, where we see a terrifying woman standing behind her. However, when she turns around, there's no one there. Since moving into the house, Isabelle has been having recurring nightmares about her mother's accident. While Chuck and Maria are busy with their own activities, Isabelle is in her room talking to herself. Chuck enters her room and starts looking at her drawings, including one of a girl standing in a corridor with ghostly hands surrounding her. Chuck asks Isabelle about the drawing, but she doesn't remember creating it or why she drew it. However, she vaguely recalls drawing it when Chuck left them. Then Chuck says goodnight and leaves Isabelle's room. After that, we see Isabelle is sitting in a broken-down car with her mother, who is actually a terrifying woman. The sight of her mother startles Isabelle, and she wakes up from the nightmare. She hears Maria's voice and goes outside, where Maria is worried about Martha being in the yard. Isabelle looks out the window and sees Chuck and Larry standing in the yard, talking to Martha. She joins them and overhears that they're discussing her. After Larry leaves, Isabelle approaches Chuck and clears the air, telling him that she didn't put Martha in the yard. In the evening, Isabelle is playing the piano when Chuck arrives. She sits down with him and starts talking about her school friend Ashley, who took her own life. She also discussed that her friend Luke shares some strange stories about the town. Chuck reassures Isabelle that she shouldn't blame herself for her mother's death. In the next scene, Isabelle is drawing in her room when Luke arrives. Chuck greets him, and Isabelle takes Luke to her room. They're discussing the town when Maria appears at the door, asking Isabelle if she's been to her studio. Without explaining why, Maria leaves. Luke shares more details about Helen Foster, a woman who lived in the town almost half a century ago. Helen's daughter was severely bullied at school, and despite Helen's efforts to seek help, no one responded. The daughter eventually took her own life. In a fit of rage, Helen killed the bully and her parents before taking her own life. The location of Helen's house remains unknown, but the address, 825 Forest Road, is mentioned, which no longer exists on current maps. Afterwards, Isabelle is alone, recording her nightmares, in which she sees her mother screaming in the kitchen, just like she did before she died in the accident. Then we see Isabelle at an art gallery with Maria, where they're looking at a drawing and chatting over drinks. Suddenly, a woman screams at the same drawing because a figure of a woman has appeared in it that wasn't there before. Isabelle looks at the drawing in shock, and the gallery is evacuated and closed. Then, at night, when Isabelle is asleep, the closet light suddenly turns on. She gets up and turns it off, but it turns back on. This time, Isabelle gets up and removes the bulb from the closet. However, when she tries to go back to sleep, the light in the closet turns on again. Frightened, Isabelle gets up and sees a ghostly figure starting to appear from behind the closet door. The sight startles her and she wakes up from the nightmare. She looks at the closet, which is closed, but the bulb is on the side table where she had placed it, which proves that this wasn't just a nightmare. It actually happened to Isabelle in reality. Then we see Isabelle is walking with Luke when Chuck calls and asks her to come home. Upon arriving, Isabelle finds Maria crying, and Chuck tells her to pack her bags before leaving. As Isabelle is packing, Luke arrives and picks up a photo of Isabelle and her mother from the table. He comments that Isabelle's mother looks different in the photo, claiming he just met her. Isabelle is shocked and corrects him, saying her mother has died and he may met with Maria. After Luke leaves, Isabelle hears her mother's voice coming from the kitchen. Frightened, Isabelle tries to approach the kitchen, despite Maria's attempts to stop her. The kitchen is in disarray, with broken crockery scattered on the floor. As Isabelle cautiously hides and tries to look into the kitchen, a terrifying woman suddenly appears, screaming. Isabelle and Maria try to flee the house, but the door is locked. They rush to their respective rooms upstairs. Isabelle hears Maria scream, and with that, her chapter ends and Maria's chapter begins. Let's start chapter 3, which begins when the family comes to view the house. Afterward, Maria is seen with Chuck in the car. The next day, as she leaves her room to go to work, we notice the reflection of a frightening woman in the glass. However, Maria doesn't notice it. Later, she enters the kitchen and finds several plates and cups stacked high, with a note among them that says, "They won't put themselves away." She then leaves for work. After returning home, Maria is once again conducting an online session while sitting near Martha. She then goes to another room to show some dresses, but when she returns to the studio, she finds Martha turned the other way. Maria moves her back to face the right direction and then heads to Isabelle's room, where Isabelle and Luke are talking. However, we had already seen that Isabelle wasn't in the studio earlier. This situation leaves Maria very distressed, and she takes some pills, hoping it's just her imagination. She then tells Chuck about the incident at the art gallery. Afterwards, when Maria is having another session, we saw a movement behind her, seemingly from Martha's hand. When Allie calls Maria, she gets up to answer, and we see Martha watching her like a living person. Maria shows her sister some bridesmaid dresses in another room over video call, and returns to find Martha gone from the studio. When Maria goes to look for Martha, she finds her standing in her own room, turning to face her. Maria screams and tries to run away. After this incident, Maria and Chuck burn Martha. When Chuck calls and Isabelle returns home, Maria is standing and crying for the same reason. Isabelle goes to pack her bags, and Maria heads to the kitchen, where she finds dishes stacked high once again, with a note that says, "Hello, Maria." Maria becomes concerned and exits the kitchen, and we see a ghostly woman passing by behind her. The sound of breaking dishes follows, and Maria freezes in fear. The ghostly figure is calling out to Isabelle. As the sound of more breaking dishes fills the air, Maria sits frozen in fear, tears streaming down her face. The ghostly figure continues to call out to Isabelle, claiming it knows Maria is here. Meanwhile, Isabelle and Luke come downstairs, and after Luke leaves, Isabelle heads towards the kitchen. As we saw in Isabelle's chapter, a terrifying woman appears in the kitchen, and Maria and Isabelle run upstairs. Isabelle hides in her room, while Maria tries to stop her but quickly locks herself in her own room, hiding in fear. Despite their initial intention to stay together in this terrifying situation, Isabelle abandons Maria and hides in her own room. Maria sits in her room, frightened, when suddenly her door opens. Terrified, Maria moves back and hides, tears welling up in her eyes. As she sits near her bed, a terrifying pale woman with a blood-filled mouth emerges from the bed and crawls towards Maria. The woman attacks Maria, and Isabelle hears Maria's screams. A few seconds later, Maria calls out to Isabelle, reassuring her. But when Isabelle looks at Maria, she's shocked. Maria's face is pale, and blood is streaming from her nose. This marks the end of Chapter 3. The next Chapter 4, Forest Road, begins where Chapter 3 left off. Maria is lying on her bed, and Chuck is sitting beside her. When the doorbell rings, Chuck gets up to answer it, and Maria suddenly opens her eyes. It turns out she was just pretending to sleep. Luke is at the door, and Isabelle lets him in. Luke shows them maps that Ashley had found about Forest Road during her studies. The maps provide directions to Forest Road, and Chuck and Isabelle prepare to head there. However, Bonnie arrives with a cameraman to film the scene. Chuck tries to decline, but Maria comes downstairs, ready to participate in the filming. Isabelle leaves Luke with Maria and sets off with Chuck to Forest Road. At home, Maria sits in front of the camera, but her gaze is fixed on Luke, who is standing in front of her. The camera starts rolling, and Maria introduces herself. Meanwhile, Chuck and Isabelle have arrived at Forest Road, where they plan to burn down the Helens house. However, Maria starts acting strangely in front of the camera, talking about her daughter coming home from school in tears. Bonnie interrupts, suggesting that Maria might be referring to Isabelle. As Chuck and Isabelle enter the haunted house, a shadow passes behind Isabelle. Back at the filming location, Maria is recording a story about Helen Foster, which shocks everyone present. In the haunted house, Chuck finds letters written by Helen Foster addressed to 15 Rose Lane, which is his own home. It turns out that they are living in the same house where Helen Foster killed the bully girl's parents. Chuck's expression changes, and he rushes towards Isabelle, who is standing in the corridor. During the interview, Maria's nose starts bleeding, and she continues to talk about Helen Foster's daughter's incident. Luke interrupts, asking for the daughter's name, and Maria replies that it's Mary, who is dead. Suddenly, Maria lets out a loud scream and transforms into the same terrifying woman who attacked her earlier. The Helen Forest's ghost appears in front of everyone, attacking them. Luke runs away in fear and hides. Piano music starts playing, and out of nowhere, Helen Foster attacks Luke. In the haunted house, Isabelle stands in the corridor, crying and apologizing to Chuck because she had seen things and drawn this scene before. As the corridor is the same one from her drawing, where a girl stands surrounded by ghostly hands. As ghostly hands start to appear around Isabelle, Chuck tries to save his sister. He makes a desperate attempt to protect Isabelle from the ghost, but the ghostly figure overpowers them. The ghost covers Isabelle's mouth with its hand, and then drags not only Isabelle but also Chuck into the room, leaving behind only memories of the family. The film ends here, with the end of the family. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling content.